Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of this top 10? Top 10 Wrestlemania moments. And what I mean by that, I don't mean matches, I don't mean quality overall, I don't mean the WrestleMania card itself. This is the specific moments in WrestleMania history that I think are the 10 best. They could be the end of the match, they could be the middle of the match, they could be a promo, it could be anything, anywhere on the WrestleMania card. With that being said, let's start off our list. Number 10, from WrestleMania 24, Shawn Michaels to Ric Flair, I'm sorry, I love you, followed by the super kick. This moment is now 17 years old, and I could tell you there's probably not a month that goes by since this has happened that I haven't quoted this. I have a really good friend named Gary, which if you watch the very, very early days of this channel, he was part of the channel with me. He's still a very good friend of mine. And when we get together, we quote this to each other because it was such an impactful moment. Everything about it, the fact that if Shawn Michaels won, Ric Flair's career was over, how much Ric Flair meant to Shawn. Everything in that led up to that one little moment where you could see the pain and the torture in his eyes. He knew that he had to give Ric Flair his best, and he didn't want to end his career, but he didn't want to disrespect Ric Flair by not ending his career. Just that look, that I'm sorry, I love you, bang. It was great, and that's why it makes our list. I think it's one of the moments that when you think of WrestleMania, that's one of the WrestleMania moments that comes to your mind. Now going from that, our number 9. From WrestleMania 31, Seth Rollins cashing in. This was the first cash-in that happened at WrestleMania, and it was such a shock because you wouldn't think that the Money in the Bank could be cashed in at WrestleMania. WrestleMania has such importance to it, such gravitas, that it didn't feel like that's something that could happen at that show. The way they did it, the way it played out, it was perfect. It was a fantastic moment. Him handing over that briefcase and putting himself in the match, I thought it was awesome. That's why it's on our list. I'll go from that. Our number 8. From WrestleMania 30, Daniel Bryan winning the championship and going off the air with him holding up the 2 belts. This is one of those special feel-good confetti dropping moments that they like to give us at the end of WrestleManias. And at the time, no feel-good moment was as great as this. This was a totally grassroots, fan-driven, fan-backed, just amazing moment that culminated everything with the Yes Movement. Our guy finally did it. He finally won. He beat the corporation. He proved that even the biggest underdog could be a champion. What a great moment. Now going from that, our number 7. From way back at WrestleMania 17, during the TLC match, Edge spearing Jeff Hardy, who was hanging from the belts, coming off a ladder. This is one of those moments that goes into pretty much every WWE highlight reel there ever is. This, Mick Foley getting thrown off the cage, some others that we may mention a bit later, Superfly diving off the cage. This is just one of those moments in one of those iconic matches that really put Edge on the map, even though he was already there, that put the teams, Edge and Christian, the Hardys, the Dudleys. This is their magnum opus, these TLC matches. And that moment is so ingrained in our memory, I could see it playing out right now. I could see Jeff's hair color just flopping around. It looked devastating. From what I understand, it was devastating. What a great moment. That's why it's on our list. Now go from that, our number 6. From WrestleMania 7, after Randy Savage was beat by the Ultimate Warrior to retire, which didn't last long, Sensational Sherry turns on Savage. Who comes down and makes a save? Miss Elizabeth. Say what you want about the real-life trials and tribulations of Elizabeth and Savage. For a wrestling fan of that time, this was the couple. And this was the storyline everybody wanted to see. They wanted to see Savage get back with Elizabeth. They wanted to see the two of them together. They were great apart, but they were greater together. What a fantastic moment when he lifts her up on his shoulder, just like the old days. As a fan, if you're watching this, if you didn't tear up, I don't think you have tear ducts. Just a fantastic, fantastic moment. Tie that in with the fact that we thought one of the greats of all time, Randy Savage, was actually retiring. Spoiler, he didn't for probably another 15 years. But still, the moment itself still holds up in my opinion. It's one of the iconic moments in my opinion in WrestleMania history. I absolutely love it. I'll go from that our number 5. From WrestleMania 12, the boyhood dream comes true. Shawn Michaels wins the World Championship. Much like I said with Daniel Bryan, this is another one of those moments where we get that feel-good wrestler finally gets to the top of the mountain, finally achieves his ultimate goal. A lot of people are on the fence on the match itself, the Iron Man match. I personally think it's a great match. There's a lot of people that don't like it, that just don't like Iron Man matches. But to me, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't love the moment afterwards, where he's sitting on the mat, looking at the belt, and you could see in his eyes, I made it. This had all the same feelings of an NBA player doing similar things sitting on the court. I remember famously back in the 90s, Dikembe Mutombo just laying on the court after the Denver Nuggets won a series that they weren't expected to win. Or even this year, there's a famous shot from Jalen Hurts after the Philadelphia Eagles win the Super Bowl, sitting in the hallway, just holding the Super Bowl trophy the same way that Shawn Michaels held the World Championship here. Just a fantastic moment. I love it. It's so iconic. It deserves to be here. Now going to our number 4. Our second moment from WrestleMania 30. And you could probably guess what this is. It's a moment that no one ever expected to happen. And probably most of us still think it should not have happened. But with that being said, it might be the most shocking moment on this list and one of the most shocking moments in wrestling history. That's Brock Lesnar ending the streak. Now, much like I just said, say what you will about the streak ending and how you may or may not think it should have ever ended. I personally don't think they should have ever ended the streak. However, you can't argue the fact that this moment is so iconic, whether it be the one fan with his eyes bulging out of his head in shock. That was all of us. We all felt that way. That moment of disbelief where, did they really count to 3? Was this supposed to happen? Was this an accident? It just was so surreal. Something, like I said, you never thought that this would happen. It was kind of like, the only thing I could think of is like Buster Douglas beating Mike Tyson. You didn't think it was possible. You didn't think anybody could beat The Undertaker. I mean, he had went up against the best and killed them all, whether it be Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Edge, Batista, Randy Orton. All through the years, he fought some of the greatest wrestlers of all time during the streak, and no one could conquer it. This is such a moment, like I said, whether you think he should have won it or not, this moment is one of the biggest moments in wrestling history, hence why it's so high on the list. We'll go from that our number 3. From WrestleMania 18, the Hollywood Hulk Hogan and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson stare down. This is epic. This is another one of those moments that's on every highlight reel ever. The way that they milked it, 2 generations of superstars, Hogan and The Rock, face to face, just standing in the ring, standing in the town that Hogan had one of his big defeats in Toronto, going back to WrestleMania 6, all of that history. Basically, the 80s version of the WWF Superstar and the 90s version of the WWF Superstar facing off with each other. I've seen a lot of people say you can't see Nolan Ryan versus Babe Ruth, or you can't see Kareem Abdul-Jabbar go up against Shaq. However, you could see Hulk Hogan and The Rock together. And that's why wrestling at times is so special. It's one of those moments where generations of fans came together and just made it special. And don't get me wrong, both these guys played it perfectly here. Just a fantastic moment that's etched in every wrestling fan's brain. I absolutely loved it. Now go from that, our number 2. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. This one from arguably the biggest WrestleMania of all time, WrestleMania 3. We get a repeat offender, and this is Hulk Hogan slamming Andre the Giant. To the heavy majority of fans that were watching at the time, this was the first time that Andre the Giant ever got body slammed. This is what WWE was leading us to think. This is what we were being spoon-fed. There are some fans that knew before, and I personally didn't. I didn't know till much after that this wasn't the first time he was body slammed. Even if you take that away from it, just the moment in front of, whether it be the 93,000 that's reported or the 78,000 that people say was the real number, that's an insane number of people to watch this moment. It was mostly built on this match. If you go back and you really think about it, unless you're someone that watches WrestleMania 3 over and over and over again, I've probably watched it a dozen times myself, probably more because I had it on VHS back in the day. But unless you study this card all the way up and down, can you name me 3 matches on the card other than Hogan, Andre, Savage, and Steamboat? I mean, just myself thinking here, Piper and Adonis, I think, was on this. That was definitely on here. Billy Jack Haynes and Hercules, Bundy and Hillbilly Jim, and I don't know what the political correct word is, but let's say smaller wrestlers, just because I'm not sure what the politically correct word is here. But I've probably also, like I said, seen this at least a dozen times. For the general person that watches wrestling and your general fan, this is the moment. This is the moment of the 80s, and this is one of the big moments in the history of wrestling. Like I said, with Edge spearing Jeff Hardy, this is one of those things that's played on every single highlight reel. You see it in the beginning of every show. Just one of the most iconic moments, in my opinion. Now, before we get to our number one, we do a thing here on our top 10 called the best of the rest. This is basically things that were thought of for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, we're going with some recency bias from WrestleMania 40, Cody Rhodes finishing his story. And look, this is a trope that plays out over and over again. Bryan at 30, Shawn Michaels at 12, Redacted at 20. You see these moments that they like to give you every few years where a guy finishes his arc and gets there and gets to the mountaintop and he beats the unsurmountable odds. And he beats the odds which were totally against him. He finds a way to nullify everything that's been put in his way. This was one of those moments. This is why, at the time of this recording, Cody is still the world champion, is still probably the most popular wrestler in one of the WWE's hottest periods in the history of their business. That's why it was thought of. Unfortunately, didn't quite make the list. Now, last but not least, on our best of the rest, probably the most controversial moment on this list. This one's going to be very polarizing. And I'm not a political person. This is not a political channel. And you probably know by me saying that what is going to be coming up now. Whatever you think of the person or people involved in this, if you love them, if you hate them, to me, it's irrelevant to the fact of how iconic this moment was. And that's from WrestleMania 23, the Battle of the Billionaires. After the match, Bobby Lashley, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Donald Trump shaving Vince McMahon's head. This is such an absurd moment, and one of those moments that only can happen in wrestling. You have a future president shaving a man's head in a wrestling ring, and it's just ludicrous. And whether what you think about Vince now or what you think about Trump, again, this isn't that kind of channel. I'm not going to talk bad or positive about either. I have my feelings on Vince McMahon more than I do on Trump because, like I said, I'm not very political. I do think Vince McMahon's not the greatest person. But that being said, I can't deny that this moment and that picture of the three of them standing there and that feeling of just absurdity made this one of the great moments in WrestleMania history. Unfortunately, it just didn't make the list. Now, before I do get to number one, let's make sure we smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if we haven't. With all that being said, my number one moment in the history of WrestleMania, from WrestleMania 13, Steve Austin refusing to submit to the sharpshooter. This is the greatest double turn in wrestling history, where you have Austin becoming a babyface, Bret Hart becoming a heel, the resiliency of Stone Cold to have blood pouring down his face. They made a t-shirt after it. In a sharpshooter, a move that for a decade we've been told is the ultimate submission move. He's sitting there in a match where he has to say he quits, where he has to submit, and he'd rather pass out than give up. Just that moment tells us what the Stone Cold character is, who he is, what his motivation is. You could feel immediately this was a guy that was going to be the biggest star in wrestling. And Bret, for his part, Bret did a fantastic job. Without that turn, I'm not saying that Austin wouldn't get to be the top guy. He definitely would have made it there. It would have took a lot longer if this moment didn't happen. This moment is so great in my opinion. It's such a touchstone in both men's careers. I think it set off the most interesting run of Bret Hart's career, Bret Hart's anti-America Hart Foundation run for that year. Sadly, that was cut short by him leaving WWE. And that's a whole other story that's been covered a million times. Even on this channel, I've covered it a million times. But that run, to me, is the best run or the most fun I ever had watching Bret Hart matches or watching Bret Hart promos. And obviously, Stone Cold, what can you say? If you don't consider him the greatest wrestler of all time or the biggest box office draw of all time, he's on your Mount Rushmore. No matter who you want to put in there, Bruno, Flair, Hogan, Undertaker, Cena, whoever you want to put in as one of the top wrestlers of all time, Steve Austin is right there with them all. And this moment, to me, defines that character, defines what we're going to see for the next half dozen years, and it's just amazing in my opinion. It's a great moment, a great visual, absolutely love it. That's why it's my number one. Now, if you think I put something too high, something too low, left something off the list altogether, let me know what you think down here in the comments. What's your favorite WrestleMania moment? It doesn't have to be one of these 10. It could be something totally different. Did you like WrestleMania 6 where Warrior beat Hogan? Was the end of an era match from 28 your favorite moment? Was The Rock vs. Cena from 28 or 29 up there for you? Let me know what you think down here in the comments. What's your favorite WrestleMania moment? With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching another Top 10.